The Strait of Hormuz may appear wide on a map, but at night, for a naval vessel in transit,
The Strait of Hormuz looks wide on a map, but at night, from the bridge of a destroyer, it can feel like a steel corridor with no shoulder and no exit. That was the trap the IRGCN tried to build for USS Fitzgerald. In black water cut by merchant wakes and tanker lights, fast attack craft began sliding into the American ship's transit lane from two directions, trying to pinch the destroyer's bow, force a slowdown, and make a U.S. warship hesitate inside one of the most dangerous choke points on Earth.
They picked darkness. They picked close water.
They picked a guided missile destroyer that had already seen this playbook before. Fitzgerald was not drifting through open ocean. She was moving through a pressure tube where every minute of transit is calculated, every course change affects traffic around her, and every contact on radar has to be sorted fast. At the strait's narrowest point, the shipping lanes are only about 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a buffer that sounds generous until large tankers, patrol craft, fishing boats, and state-backed speedboats all start sharing the same night picture. That kind of geography rewards the side willing to get reckless first. It punishes the side that misreads how ready the other ship really is. And that is exactly where this crisis sharpened. The threat was not a missile arcing over the horizon. It was closer, meaner, and much harder to read in the opening seconds.
Small boats. High speed. Tight angles. Deliberate crossing patterns.
The kind of move designed to blur the line between harassment and attack until the other side is forced to make a call under maximum pressure. That is the IRGCN's signature in Hormuz. They do not need to sink a destroyer to create a strategic effect. They only need to crowd it, film it, slow it, and prove that even the US Navy must pass through Iranian pressure before it reaches the Gulf. But that logic only works if the warship in front of them gives away the initiative. Fitzgerald did not. By the time the first bridge report confirmed the contact geometry, the American crew already understood the danger. Multiple small returns were approaching at speed, not holding to normal traffic behavior, not maintaining safe separation, and not behaving like confused civilian mariners. A Burke-class destroyer carries enormous combat power, but in a nighttime straight transit, raw firepower is only part of the equation. The harder challenge is recognition. You have to decide in compressed time whether the boats are posturing, probing, filming, or setting the conditions for a strike. You also have to make that decision while protecting nearby commercial traffic, staying inside navigational limits, and avoiding the first careless move that could hand Tehran a propaganda victory. That is why Hormuz matters so much. This is not just a narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman. It is one of the world's most important energy corridors, the maritime throat through which a huge share of Gulf oil moves toward global markets. A naval confrontation there never stays local for long. Insurance rates jump. Tanker operators react. Regional partners look at Washington. Rivals study response times. Every maneuver becomes a signal. Every hesitation becomes a headline. Iran understands that better than almost anyone. The Revolutionary Guard Navy was built around that reality. It is not organized to outfight the U.S. Navy ship for ship in blue water. It is organized to make confined water ugly. Fast inshore attack craft, support boats, coastal missile batteries, drones, mines, shore-based sensors, and layers of ambiguity all exist for one reason: to turn a narrow maritime passage into a political weapon. The Guard's edge is not elegance.
It is compression.
Compress the battle space. Compress decision time. Compress the legal distance between harassment and lethal force. Make the other commander choose under heat. So when those boats came at Fitzgerald, the danger was bigger than the hulls in the water. If the destroyer yielded too much sea room, the message would echo across the region by sunrise. If she overreacted, Tehran could sell the encounter as American aggression. That is why the first minutes in this kind of event are so tense. The side under pressure has to be firm without being sloppy. The side creating the pressure is betting on exactly the opposite. Night makes that calculation even harsher. In daylight, a fast boat can be tracked by wake, silhouette, and obvious relative motion. After dark, the same craft can hide inside shoreline glow, tanker backscatter, and broken reflections off the water. A destroyer's sensors are excellent, but sensors do not remove responsibility from the people interpreting them. A fishing hull, a patrol craft, and an armed speedboat can all share the same patch of sea for a few critical moments before the pattern resolves. In a place like Hormuz, where civilian and military traffic overlap at close range, those moments are expensive. Sea state matters too. Even moderate chop can make a small boat's profile rise and vanish between swells, which is why range calls, bearing drift, and rate of closure become more important than a single visual impression. On Fitzgerald, that meant the bridge and combat information center were effectively fighting two battles at once. One was physical, keep the ship safe on track and ready to defend itself. The other was cognitive, build a clean enough picture to know which contact mattered first, which maneuver was posturing, and whether the next turn of an approaching bow was a feint or the start of a direct threat run. The radar picture on a modern destroyer is never just radar. It is layers.
Surface search, electronic support, optical systems, night vision, lookouts, bridge reports,
Combat Information Center correlation. Each layer fills in what the others cannot. Small boats are hard enough in daylight. In darkness, against sea clutter with shoreline. Lights in the background and merchant traffic moving through a constrained lane, the problem gets worse by the second. A fast craft at 30 knots can eat up a mile in 2 minutes. That means you do not get the luxury of a long debate. Fitzgerald's team moved the way professional crews are supposed to move when ambiguity begins turning hostile.
the contact plot tightened,
Bearings were updated in rapid sequence.
range calls shortened.
The captain did not need a dramatic speech. He needed verified facts and disciplined options. The boats were not just nearby. They were shaping a box. One pair crossed ahead and slowed just enough to threaten the destroyer's track. Another element stayed wider off the beam, forcing the Americans to account for flanking movement. A support craft lingered farther back, the kind of platform that can act as a controller, a camera, or a weapons relay depending on what comes next. This is where the response window starts collapsing. A destroyer can make more than 30 knots, but in Hormuz, speed is not freedom. Traffic density, navigational safety, and the strategic consequences of collision all narrow what a commander can actually do. If Fitzgerald turned too aggressively, she could foul the lane, endanger commercial shipping, or give the approaching boats the exact confusion they wanted. If she held course too long, the lead craft could force a crossing situation at dangerously close range. Every second that passes without clear compliance from the boats shifts the encounter one step closer to lawful defensive action. Warnings went out.
Bridge-to-bridge calls.
International hails. Light signals.
Danger blasts.
The language in these moments is blunt on purpose. Identify yourself.
Alter course. Maintain separation. Do not approach.
Professional mariners know the code. Naval crews know it cold. So when the lead IRGCN boats kept coming, no one on Fitzgerald had to guess what that meant. This was not a misunderstanding. It was pressure by design. And here is the part that often gets missed by people watching these incidents from a distance. The destroyer is not passive while it warns. Even before a single shot is considered, the whole ship is already shifting posture. Gunners are moved into clearer fields of fire. Optical trackers are locked on. The bridge and combat teams cross-check authority, arcs, and nearby traffic. Surface contacts are prioritized. The ship may adjust speed just enough to improve geometry without surrendering the lane. Searchlights can rip open the dark and erase the anonymity small boats depend on. Once that happens, everyone involved knows the encounter has entered a new phase. That phase arrived fast. The lead craft pressed deeper across Fitzgerald's bow, trying to force the larger ship to check speed. Another pair accelerated on the destroyer's quarter, seeking the classic swarm effect: too many angles, too little time, too much motion for one decision cycle. It looks chaotic from the outside, but it is calculated. Small boats do not beat a destroyer with armor or missiles in a close encounter. They try to beat it with geometry and hesitation. That was the mistake. Fitzgerald was not alone inside her own skin. An Arleigh Burke is a layered combat system with a bridge, a combat information center, integrated sensors, and trained watch teams that live on procedure. She did not need to guess where the closest boats were, how fast they were closing, or which bearings mattered most. She knew. And once the picture was clear enough, she could turn that knowledge into pressure of her own. The destroyer's move was measured, not theatrical. Maintain transit. Hold legal position. Illuminate the threat. Tighten internal readiness. Present visible force. Deny the boats a clean crossing. That sounds simple when said slowly. It is not simple at night with multiple contacts closing and cameras likely rolling from at least one Iranian craft. Yet this is where experience matters. The crew did not need to improvise a personality. They needed to execute a standard that had been rehearsed until it was muscle memory. Crew-served weapons were brought to full visual deterrent posture. The Mk-45 5-inch gun remained the giant in reserve, powerful but far too escalatory for a close small boat encounter unless the fight truly broke open. The real logic sat lower and nearer. The ship's smaller guns, mounted for fast surface threats, backed by the unmistakable reality that an American destroyer can scale from warning to destruction in seconds if forced to. Behind that visible layer sat a deeper one few harassing crews can ever ignore for long. The same warship they were trying to crowd carried Aegis sensors, close-in defenses, and enough combat power to dominate far beyond the horizon. The boats were playing near the edges of a machine built for war at every range. Still, the most important weapon in that moment was not a gun.
It was control. Control of distance.
Control of escalation. Control of the legal record. Fitzgerald had to show in real time that every chance to de-escalate had been given and ignored. That matters tactically because it buys decision clarity. It matters politically because the first videos out of an encounter never carry the whole truth. They carry fragments.
Angle. Noise. Emotion.
The ship that documents discipline usually owns the story later. The range kept shrinking. At 1,000 yards, the boats were already inside the zone where intent becomes harder to separate from capability. At 500, the bridge no longer needed assumptions. One craft was visibly crossing ahead at unsafe distance. Another was holding on a converging line. Fitzgerald answered with a controlled adjustment to preserve sea room, but not enough to reward the block.
More warnings. More lights.
More unmistakable signals that the next step would not be verbal. Then one of the lead boats pushed too far. It cut in close with the kind of confidence that only works if the larger ship blinks. In daylight, it would have been provocative. In darkness, it was nearly suicidal. The American response came exactly the way it should in a professional navy, not as panic, not as rage, but as sequence.
Final warnings. Confirmed range.
Clear firing authority. A short burst of warning fire placed where it could not be misunderstood and could not be mistaken for indecision.
The night changed instantly.
Everything the IRGCN craft had been using as cover vanished under that burst and the destroyer's flood of light. The psychological balance flipped. Harassment depends on making the target feel constrained. The moment Fitzgerald demonstrated she was fully in command of the escalation ladder, the small boats lost their main advantage. Their speed was still real. Their weapons were still real. But the illusion that they could physically dictate the destroyer's movement was gone. One boat sheared off first, turning hard enough to throw a fan of black water under the lights. Another hesitated for a fatal half-second, long enough for every gun crew on Fitzgerald to settle deeper into track and every sailor on the Iranian side to understand how close they had drifted to crossing a line they could not uncross.
No missile launch. No cinematic fireball.
Just the cold, immediate realization that the next rounds would not be for warning. That discipline protects the sailors on the other side. In a swarm encounter, one panic trigger pull, one misread wake, one overloaded coxswain turning the wrong way can convert signaling into funerals. Naval commanders know that avoiding killing is not weakness. It is real mastery. That is usually how the most dangerous military encounters end, when one side suddenly remembers the difference between intimidation and survivability. The remaining IRGCN craft widened out. The element off Fitzgerald's quarter lost cohesion first. The lead pair abandoned the bow block. The support boat began pulling back, whether to reset the scene, report upward, or simply get out before the event became unrecoverable. On the American ship, nobody celebrated. They kept tracking, kept hailing, kept the guns ready. Because the second mistake in these waters is assuming the first retreat is final. For several more minutes, the contact picture remained ugly. The Iranian boats hovered at wider range, fast enough to threaten, far enough to claim restraint, close enough to keep cameras interested. That is also part of the method. Even after a failed pressure attempt, they want the region to know they were there. They want tankers to remember that every transit comes with a shadow. They want domestic audiences to see defiance. They want foreign navies to burn manpower and concentration on every mile of passage. But the tactical result was already settled. Fitzgerald had held her lane. She had denied the block. She had escalated lawfully and visibly. Most important, she had not allowed a swarm-style approach to fracture command judgment. For a destroyer in a confined strait at night, that is the win condition. You do not need a sinking ship to prove control. You need the other side to break contact on your terms. When the transit continued, the meaning of the encounter stretched well beyond one destroyer and a pack of fast boats. Regional partners would read it as a reminder that U.S. warships still intend to exercise passage where international law allows. Commercial shipping interests would read it as proof that the strait remains navigable, but fragile. Tehran would read it as a failed attempt to force a symbolic check on a U.S. vessel without paying the price of open combat. And military planners on every side would note the same thing. Nighttime pressure in confined water is still one of the easiest ways to spark a crisis no one can fully control once live rounds replace warnings. That is the real lesson here. In modern naval competition, The most dangerous fight is often the one that begins below the threshold of declared war.
No formal battle line. No massive salvo.
Just a narrowing channel, a dark horizon, a few aggressive hulls, and a commander who has seconds to decide whether the contact in front of him is bluffing, probing, or about to commit to violence. In those seconds, training matters more than rhetoric. Seamanship matters more than slogans. Discipline matters more than bravado. The IRGCN tried to use the night, the lane, and the politics of restraint to trap USS Fitzgerald in a no-win moment. Instead, they reminded everyone why small boat intimidation has hard limits when the target is alert, armed, and unwilling to surrender control of the encounter. Hormuz will stay dangerous.
Iran will keep testing.
American ships will keep transiting. And every crew that enters that strait after dark will know one truth more clearly than before. In confined water, the side that mistakes discipline for weakness is usually the side that backs away first. If you think the next standoff in Hormuz goes further, say which side blinks last.